beyond the article that you guys wrote, in your book, you talk about 3 fundamental things that are being affirmatively taught in schools, in colleges, that are leading to these kinds of existential breakdowns that you yourself experienced. And if you could, a lot of parents listen to this, and a lot of kids too, who are in college. What should they be most mindful of in that regard?
Well, Conley and the American Mind, the book that came out in 2018, not the original article, ended up being a lot more of a parenting book than we expected going in. And we started doing the research, and we realized that a lot of this, is coming down from parents, and always with the best of intentions. Actually, I'm that kind of dad. I have to do this. But the
how old is he?
I can't
What's
stop
his
myself.
Nice. Who is that?
Maxwell. He's the one in front is 4, and now, but he's like 1 in that picture. And Benjamin is 6, and today is his last day of kindergarten.
I missed it. If you're going to give him a shameless plug, get it up there to the lens. Let's see him.
Yeah, they're pretty cute.
Not bad.
But anyway, so it became it became much more of a parenting book, and that partially came from the research that we were doing. And of course, we talk about how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure. It's like the idea of the immediate sense of I have to protect my kids from harm, and I have to do everything I can to make sure that they're not psychologically harmed. If nobody's pushing back, that can kind of take on a life of its own. But the way we tried to get this across was it was as if, and this is the opening of Coddling the American Mind. I actually won't spoil the opening, but we say it's as if we had been given the worst possible advice to a generation of young people and to a generation of parents that doesn't match with ancient wisdom, that doesn't match with modern psychology, and that will make your life worse if you believe them. And so we present these 3 things. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Always trust your feelings. And that's the one that people are kind of like, well, that sounds nice. So like, actually, it's not a good idea. Like, most of becoming an adult is like, try to figure out what your feelings are saying, but don't punch that guy or don't quit on the scene when you're sad. Anyway, and the third one is life is a battle between good people and evil people. And the thing is, we kind of like try to look at the audience and say, like, if we all think this is so obviously bad advice to give to anyone, then why are we implicitly giving this advice to an entire generation of young people?
Well, what's the answer? Why are we doing that?
I think it's because it sounds initially, if you don't think it through very well, and nobody actually points out that this is foolishness, it's tempting. Because, and I think this is partially polarization, I think this is partially a very wealthy, comfortable upper class, like that we gained so much. So like for the first point, safetyism. There was so much progress made towards against child mortality by doing sensible things like putting warnings, figuring out greater commitment to safety. Like there are fewer kids die from a lot of these smaller accidents than did when we were kids, by a lot. And so it seemed like this great success. So why not do it infinitely and go off forever and protect them from all harm? And nobody was willing to say, particularly for more left-leaning parents, it's like, actually, your grandmother was right about something, that essentially, everything's trade-offs, and that essentially you can't be permanently sealed off from the pain of the world. So it's got this kind of attractiveness, and if nobody's willing to make the contrary argument, it can just kind of take off. When it comes to always trust your feelings, that one I think is a little bit like, I think that's something that you'll see even in popular movies. It sounds nice to always trust your feelings. It sounds romantic to always trust your feelings.
Go with your gut.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's terrible advice. There's I think Susan David, I always try to give her credit for this because I love her quote on this, which is that you should think of your feelings as information, not directions, which I just thought was just perfect. And there's also in a recent song, sometimes your feelings can give wrong directions. And then the last one, that's one that you have to fight all throughout human history, that people who don't disagree with me are either stupid or evil is pretty deeply in the human brain. I felt like growing up, a lot of what we were taught and fed was, we all know that we're deeply tribalistic as people, so really try to remember that people who disagree with you, they still generally think they're doing the right thing, they still generally think they're acting with the best of motivations, and that was really kind of absorbed. Like the fact that our fiction, earlier in this century involved Don Draper and Walter White and Tony Soprano. To me, it meant that we were reaching a stage where we're kind of like, oh yeah, like it's more morally ambiguous and therefore a lot of times, honestly, more interesting drama. But it's like somewhere in the last decade, and I do think to a large degree, partially because of social media, which I'm happy to talk more about, we went backwards to a much more moralistic frame that essentially, actually, I think it's true. I think people who disagree with me are either stupid or evil, which is the opposite of being sophisticated. But when enough people believe it, it's bad for pluralism and democracy.
Yeah, I mean, not just moralistic, but binary, right? I mean, let's make a deal. There was the door, there was the curtain, there was the box, right? You had three choices. Now it's always and only two. And so our heroes need to have the white hat and the gleaming smile and sit astride the white steed, and our bad guys need to twirl their mustache and laugh maniacally. And very difficult to see anything in between. I hadn't thought about it the way you said. Don Draper's a great example. All of these characters who are really flawed, but interesting nevertheless. To make Tony Soprano a hero is a pretty neat trick after you see him kill some people. Yeah.
And I do think that fiction did a great idea. It went from relatively easy, solutions like Star Trek Voyager. I'm a nerd. No shock there. A lot of times, like Voyager would have these kind of, they set up a moral quandary. There was this monster that was like Super Hitler that also was like covered in like this deeply infectious thing. And when you could hear its thoughts, all they thought was kill. And she risks the lives of 120 people to save Super Hitler. And I'm like, that's not a good trolley experiment. Like I actually think you're just being moralistic, not actually moral.
Explain the trolley experiment for people who don't know.
Yeah, so the trolley experiment is, there are 5 people tied to the train tracks, and there's a turn on the train tracks, and you have a switch, and there's one person in front of the turn. So basically what they do, the idea is, and it's great for moral philosophy to go through this experiment, to figure out, would you be willing to be the person who pulls the thing to kill just one person instead of 5 people? And generally the moral argument is essentially considered, well, you'd probably actually have a moral duty to do to pull the lever. But there's a whole sort of industry, of trolley experiments that try to that tweak it and change it, including one interesting finding that if it required you to for some reason they make them fat. If to push a fat person in the way, and that would actually save the 5 people. And when it actually involves human contact, people get a lot less comfortable with it. It's like I'd actually be killing them with my own hands, which points out something really human. But under no circumstances does a trolley experiment involve. It's kind of like, okay, 120 completely innocent people have died, and you can save one super infectious Super Hitler. And it's like, no, that one's not even hard. And so like we had all this moralistic fiction for a while with bad moral tales, and then suddenly you had situations where you were like, wow, what like the Ozark was amazing, because certainly these were morally compromised people, but once you're in the situation that your kids are going to get killed unless you do make some tough choices, you're like, wow, like fiction got better about it, but we as Americans got worse at being morally sophisticated and realizing that not everyone, again, who disagrees with us is stupid or evil.